What if I told you there was a pill that would allow you to increase your mental capacity? You'll think faster, learn faster, and be more productive. That's exactly what happened to Eddie, a depressed writer. Hey guys, this is Afraid, and you are watching Limitless. Let's get into it. What a better way to start a movie than with a scene of a man wanting to jump off a skyscraper. This blue-eyed man's name is Eddie Morra. He's having his own success, but now he's undertaken. Wait, let's start from the beginning. Eddie Morra is a young, aspiring, Italian-American writer in deep crisis. I know, from the appearance, you might think he's a drug addict or an alcoholic, but he's just a writer in depression. He's working on a book, but hasn't been able to write a single word. Also, he was abandoned by his girlfriend, with whom he was staying since after he got divorced, so this is the second woman to leave him. Even though they are no longer a couple, the ex-girlfriend Lindy, who has just received a promotion at work, continues to help him. Eddie couldn't go on like this anymore. He wanted to change something in his life. He needed a change, and the change was meeting Vernon. Yeah, this guy with the scarf and the sunglasses. Vernon is Eddie's former brother-in-law. He did not expect to see him in this condition and decided to talk to him in the bar. In fact, Vernon Gant is destined to change his life. Eddie tells him how much his life sucks, and Vernon suggests he try an experimental nootropic drug called NZT-48, which can maximize cognitive abilities. Eddie, rightly, is very skeptical. Tell me what person with an IQ higher than your shoe size would trust Vernon in the first instance. Nevertheless, considering his failed life, Eddie has nothing to lose and decides to give it a try. Before entering the house, he meets the wife of the landlord of the house. She wanted to talk to Eddie about the rent payment. The pill takes effect. Eddie discovers he knows things he didn't remember learning, absorbs and implements everything he hears instantly. He turns his landlord's wife's barrage of insults into a stimulating discussion about her law school thesis, giving her advice and helping her finish it in just 45 minutes. Then they have sex in the remaining time they spend together. Wow, where can I get this pill? However, Eddie begins to change his life. Of course, he starts by cleaning up the mess he had in his house. After that, he manages to write half of his book in a few hours. The next morning, however, the miraculous effect wears off. However, the pages written by him don't vanish. As was to be expected, the writing is a success. But to finish the book, Eddie needed more pills. So he is driven to turn to Vernon. Eddie finds Vernon in his apartment. Vernon has been beaten up, really worked over. His lip is split, his face is swollen and bruised. Vernon reveals to him that this pill is not legal at all. So, Eddie realizes that it is an unknown, untested, possibly dangerous drug that came out of some unknown lab. Nevertheless, Eddie needs more. Vernon agrees to help him, but first asks him to go down to the dry cleaners and get his suit, along with breakfast. Eddie returns and finds the door open. He enters the house and sees Vernon sitting on the couch. Eddie notices that the place has been ransacked, destroyed. After that, he notices that Vernon has been shot in the head. In a panic, Eddie calls the police. He realizes that the thieves were looking for the thing he needed too, the magic pill. So he sets out to find it, hoping the thieves couldn't find it. At first, he finds nothing, but then he remembers that Vernon hated to cook and realizes where he could have hidden the treasure. In fact, inside the oven, he found a small bag full of pills. Jackpot. Soon after, the police had arrived, and Eddie, after hiding the pills, opens the door. After questioning him, the police release him, and Eddie finally gets to use those pills to change his life. Over the next few days, he continued to take them and quickly got his life back on track. He completed the book in 4 days, learned to play the piano in 3 days, and learned several languages perfectly just by listening to people speak them. He meets new people and has experiences he never dreamed of. While on vacation, Eddie realizes that with these pills, he could do much bigger and more serious things. So he throws himself into finance, a world in which he sees the possibility of great gains. Initially, he turned $800 into $2,000 in just 1 day, after which it became $7,000 the next day. But he was too slow. He needed a much bigger capital. Unable to apply for a loan from the bank, Eddie goes to a Russian criminal who could help him with a loan, Gennady. Eddie manages to persuade him, and Gennady lends him $100,000. He threatens to make him suffer if he doesn't return the money. With trading, Eddie goes from $12,000 to $2 million in 10 days. After that, he has numerous job opportunities and interview proposals, but most importantly, he has the opportunity to meet and talk with Wall Street's #1, Carl Van Loon. Also, Eddie gets back together with Lindy. One day, Eddie was walking Lindy to work, and he noticed a man staring at him. Eddie walks away with Lindy. The next day, Eddie meets Carl Van Loon, and the latter asks him what his secret is. Jokingly, Eddie states that medicine is his secret. After that, he expounds on his knowledge and mentions a formula based on mass psychology. In a limo, Carl tests Eddie by asking him to review a file of different companies. Eddie discovers that there is a major merger in the works. Carl drops Eddie off in Chinatown and invites him the next day for another meeting. Carl realizes that Eddie could be a tool for making billions and doesn't want to lose him. As he walks, Eddie loses track of time, which is an emerging side effect of NZT. Among the disconnected events, he recalls Bruce Lee movies to help him fight a gang of robbers in a subway station. Then he ends up in a bar and meets new friends. 18 hours later, he finds himself normal, limping, but with no memory of recent events. His can of NZT-48 is nearly empty, and he can no longer decipher company files. He calls to avert a meeting with Carl, but Kevin convinces him to attend. Carl asks him about Hank Atwood, a corporate rival who came out of nowhere into the limelight 2 years ago. But Eddie can't focus. He notices a news report on TV about the murder of a blonde woman in a hotel the day before. He apologizes and vomits outside, fearing he killed the girl during his blackout. Afraid of the side effects of NZT before taking another pill, Eddie tries to find Vernon's other clients to understand more, but each phone call is a dead end. Everyone was either dead or hospitalized. The next call he makes randomly rings the phone of the tough guy in the tan coat sitting on the other side of a parkette. Eddie notices him and runs. After that, he meets his ex-wife Melissa at a bar. She is an exasperated addict who admits to taking NZT as well, but stopped taking it when she realized that no one could operate at that level of mental activity without negative consequences. Now that she's been off for 2 years, she can't focus for more than 10 minutes. Then, Gennady finds Eddie and asks for his money back. Eddie sees a dropped NZT pill and takes it, but Gennady notices it and consumes it. Gennady feels fine, and, after getting his $100,000 back, lets Eddie go. Eddie, sick and bloodied, staggers into Lindy's office. He tells her everything, admits he needs the drugs, and admits to hiding his main stash in his house. Leaving Eddie unconscious on the floor of her office, she retrieves the plastic bag herself. In the cab, the man in the tan coat from the hardwood floor starts following her. She brutally kills 2 bystanders trying to help her. As she escapes and hides in Central Park, she phones Eddie, who encourages her to take one of the pills. Under his influence, Lindy escapes using a girl ice skating as a weapon, cutting the face of the man. Eddie and Lindy sleep together, but in the morning she gets dressed and leaves him. Once again, Gennady meets Eddie, this time looking for more pills. Subsequently, Eddie hires 2 bodyguards. He meets Carl again, looking and acting sharp, and is tasked with brokering the largest corporate acquisition in history. Eddie figures out the correct dosage to take, remembering to eat and avoid alcohol to avoid blackouts. He orders up tailored suits with imperceptible compartments to hide his pills. Then, Eddie hires a chemist to decode NZT pills in 6 months for $2 million. During a business lunch, he recognizes a police detective from the Vernon death investigation watching him. The cop shows Eddie the newspaper photo, which identified him as being in the murdered blonde's hotel. Eddie hires a good lawyer named Morris Brandt, who pulls him out against weak circumstantial evidence. Eddie reveals plans to Carl to move on with his career, but Carl wants him to stay, recognizing Eddie's bizarre ability. Finding his hotel room in chaos, Eddie purchases an $8.5 million secure condo, the Fortress. On the way, he meets the Russian again, who wants 20 pills. Since he is about to receive $40 million from the Atwood merger, Eddie is confident he has enough money to deal with Gennady. At the office, however, Hank Atwood is absent. After that, Carl and Eddie meet Hank Atwood's wife, who tells them that Hank is in the hospital. So, the deal will close when he gets better. Eddie notices Mrs. Atwood's limo driver, the man in the tan coat, and realizes that Atwood must also be an NZT user, who won't get better because he's out of NZT. Back at the office, Carl is distraught. Atwood is in a coma, and Carl wants to know where Eddie has been, thinking that Eddie knows what is going on and suspecting that he has been betrayed. In the bathroom, Eddie discovers that his pills have been stolen and begins to get agitated. In Carl's office arrives a box addressed to Eddie. Inside the box were the severed hands of his 2 bodyguards. Arriving home, Eddie watches TV and sees Mrs. Atwood and her lawyer, who is also his lawyer, Morris Brandt. Eddie's face changes appearance because he didn't take his pills in time. Upon seeing his lawyer, Eddie realizes that the lawyer stole his hidden pills. Soon after, he sees the Russians coming for him from the security cameras, assaulting a steel door with a chainsaw. At that point, Eddie goes to the edge of the balcony ready to kill himself rather than succumb to their undoubtedly painful torture. He suddenly remembers where one last NZT pill is and tries to retrieve it, but loses it when the Russians break in. Gennady shoots his last pill, converted to an injectable form, and begins to prepare Eddie for the slow and painful torture he is about to undergo. With one last shot, Eddie manages to turn the tables and kill Gennady. While drinking Gennady's blood, Eddie also ingests the NZT-48 that was in Gennady's blood, so he recovers his mental abilities for good, with no side effects. The other two Russian thugs, having been busy breaking into Eddie's safe with drills, return to the room. Eddie manages to fight them off after licking Gennady's NZT-enriched blood, blinding one of them before killing them. At the hospital, Hank Atwood's situation gets worse and worse, so Eddie realizes that although Brandt stole his pills, he did not give them to Mr. Atwood. Eddie meets the man in the brown coat in the waiting room, who, now that his boss is dead, aids Eddie's search through Brandt's safe, where he finds his packet of pills, while the man in the tan coat keeps watching over Brandt, bound and gagged on the floor. 12 months later, Eddie's book is published, and he is running for US Senate, New York. That same day, he receives a surprise visit from Carl at his campaign office. Although warm at first, Carl reveals that he knows about the pills Eddie takes, and subsequently shuts down his NZT lab. Carl will guarantee him an unlimited supply in exchange for some future insider information. Eddie seems frustrated, but showing off his skills, he says he's off NZT and doesn't need it, having become permanently enhanced and pushing Carl away. At an upscale Chinese restaurant, Eddie and Lindy are together again. He orders his food in fluent Chinese, then notices Lindy's puzzled look. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then discover the prison of the future. Build vertically to drive humans to share in order to survive.